The storm was coming faster than Elias Ward had expected. On Vera 9, storms were violent, unpredictable, and relentless. Lightning cut across the violet sky, illuminating jagged mountains that rose like broken teeth from the scarred landscape. The winds tore at his outpost walls, making the metal panels groan, rattling everything inside. For a moment he paused, listening to the sound of the storm against his small habitat, and he knew he had to act fast. Alone on the edge of a dangerous frontier planet, survival was never easy. Elias moved through the narrow corridors of his outpost, checking sensors and panels as the wind howled outside. The station was small, barely enough for one man, but he had made it a home of sorts. A few living quarters, a lab, a control room with battered consoles, and a small storage area for supplies. Everything was reinforced for the storms, but even the strongest walls had their limits. He wiped sweat from his brow and tightened a panel screw that rattled loose. Then came the sound that made him stop. It was faint at first, barely audible over the storm, a deep hum of engines. Elias froze, listening carefully. The hum grew louder, rhythmic, controlled. Not a natural sound, not one belonging to the wind. He rushed to the main observation window. Through the streaked glass, he saw shadows moving in the dust. 3 sleek ships, armored and black, skidding to a stop on the battered terrain outside. The storm's fury threw them around, but they landed with precision that made Elias' heart pound. He felt a mix of fear and curiosity. Visitors were rare on Vera 9, and usually they were drones or traders. These were neither. The ships were designed for hunting or war. He could see it in the angles, in the way they hugged the ground even in the wind, and in the faint blue glow from their propulsion units. They were professional, and they were deliberate. Through the glass, Elias saw figures emerge from the ships. 3 aliens, tall and lean, moving with the grace of predators. Their armor gleamed faintly despite the storm, reflecting lightning in streaks. Weapons were holstered, but their presence was unmistakable. They were huntresses, and they were dangerous. Elias' mind raced. He had to decide, hide, fight, or communicate. None of the options were simple, and mistakes could be fatal. One of them paused, head tilting as if sensing him. Elias felt his pulse quicken. Then came a voice, soft but clear, carried strangely over the storm, as if intended for him alone. "He's mine!" The words hit him like a jolt of electricity. They were not a threat, not a warning yet, but they carried intention, ownership, a challenge. Elias didn't know what they meant exactly. Perhaps one of these huntresses had tracked him, or maybe the storm had simply driven them here. He couldn't be sure, and guessing wrong could cost him his life. He pulled back from the window and began to prepare. There were no reinforcements coming. No help would arrive in time. His only weapon was his own mind, his knowledge of the terrain, and the outpost he had spent years reinforcing. He checked the interior doors, making sure they were locked and sealed, and powered up the sensors to monitor every movement outside. As he worked, he kept one eye on the storm. The winds tore at the landscape, turning the red dust into a blinding whirlwind. It was easy to see why even professional hunters could be forced into a corner by Vera 9 weather. The storm was the real predator here, yet the aliens moved with confidence. They seemed to ignore the worst of it, their steps sure despite the wind and debris. That only made Elias respect their skill and fear them more. Hours passed. The storm roared, the sky flickered with lightning, and the aliens prowled the perimeter. Elias watched their movements, noting patterns, searching for weaknesses. He realized something important. They were not attacking outright. Instead, they were assessing, probing, testing. The words "he's mine" repeated in his mind, not as a threat, but as a puzzle. Was it a hunt or a test of his abilities? Elias decided he would let them think they were in control, but he would not be passive. Using the outpost's defenses, he set small distractions. A panel left slightly ajar here, a sensor triggered remotely there. Each move was subtle, almost imperceptible. The huntresses paused when a console flashed, scanning carefully, trying to understand the anomaly. Elias felt a thrill. He was not as strong as them, not as fast, but his mind was sharp. Humans had a way of surviving, of turning the odds in their favor, and he intended to prove it. Night fell, or at least what counted as night on Vera 9. The storm raged in a never-ending cycle of wind and light. Elias prepared food and water, conserving energy. He listened, observed, and thought. He learned their patterns. The tallest huntress preferred scanning the terrain from high points. The one with the long spear stayed closer to the storm's edge. and the third, who had spoken the words, moved cautiously, almost watching him more than the surroundings. It was the last one, Naira, who intrigued him most. She had spoken first, and she had held herself differently. There was intelligence in her gaze, curiosity mixed with something he could not yet name. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. Humans were unpredictable, and maybe that had drawn her attention. Elias didn't underestimate it. He knew that the human mind could surprise even the most skilled hunters. At one point, the storm caused a small power surge. Lights flickered, alarms went off. Elias acted quickly, stabilizing the system before it failed completely. Naira watched. He could feel her gaze, sharp and assessing. The words she had spoken earlier echoed again, now with a hint of something else, something like acknowledgement. "He's mine," she had said, but perhaps it was not just a claim, it could have been a statement of respect. Hours became more difficult. The storm was relentless, the dust blinding, and the huntresses still outside. Elias moved with care, always aware of their presence. He realized that while they had strength and skill, they lacked one human trait: improvisation under unexpected circumstances. He made small adjustments, using the outpost's defenses in clever ways, creating minor hazards that slowed them, tested their reactions. Naira reacted differently each time. She didn't rush. She studied, considered, adapted. Elias felt a mixture of fear and admiration. This was not just survival. This was a battle of minds. Humans had survived in harsher conditions than Vera 9, and he intended to show it. By the end of the first cycle of the storm, Elias had learned as much as he could. The Huntresses were formidable, yes, but they were also predictable in their own way. He began to understand their strengths and their limitations. More importantly, he understood his own. He had built this outpost, maintained it, survived alone for years. His experience, his ingenuity, his ability to adapt quickly, these were weapons no alien could anticipate fully. He sat in the control room, looking out at the storm. The Huntresses were outside for now. They were assessing him as much as he was assessing them. Elias knew the next phase would be crucial. Would they attack outright? Would they retreat? Or would something else happen entirely? The storm continued its furious assault, tearing at the outpost, howling through the valleys, turning night into a chaotic dance of light and sound. Yet within the small, battered walls of his home, Elias felt a sense of clarity. He was not just a man alone on a dangerous planet. He was a human, clever, adaptable, and resilient, and sometimes that alone was enough to survive. A distant roar of the wind carried another warning. One of the Huntresses had moved closer, cutting through the storm with precision. Elias watched, heart pounding. This was no longer just about surviving the storm. It was about surviving them, about proving that humans were not prey, even when faced with beings designed to hunt. The words "he's mine" repeated in his mind, but they no longer frightened him. They were a challenge, a test. Elias smiled faintly. Humans had faced impossible odds before, and they had always found a way. Perhaps this was just another storm to endure, another test to overcome. And in the storm, with lightning flashing and wind screaming, Elias Ward prepared. He would not back down. He would survive, and maybe, just maybe, he would show the Huntresses why humans were something to be reckoned with. The storm roared on, but inside the outpost, a quiet determination burned brighter than any lightning in the sky. The storm had not let up. It raged with the same violent energy, lightning slashing across the sky and thunder rolling like the roar of an ancient beast. Outside, the three Huntresses moved cautiously through the gusting wind and flying dust. Their ships remained grounded, shields flickering against the storm's fury, but they did not retreat. Instead, they circled the outpost, their movements precise, calculated, as if they were reading the terrain and Elias in equal measure. Elias observed them from the control room, tracking each movement on his sensors. He noticed small things that revealed patterns. The way the tallest huntress paused at high points, scanning the horizon, the one with the long spear keeping close to the storm's edge, and Naira, the one who had spoken first, moving deliberately, almost stalking him without aggression. She seemed fascinated by his actions, and for a moment he considered that perhaps this was more than a hunt. The outpost groaned under the storm, panels shaking and wires sparking. Elias knew the situation could turn dangerous at any moment. He moved quickly, securing loose equipment, rerouting power from non-essential systems to stabilize the generator. Every action was calculated. Humans were not the strongest species, nor the fastest, but intelligence and improvisation were weapons few could match. A loud crash outside made him flinch. One of the Huntresses had forced her way onto the platform near the main entrance, testing the outer defenses. Elias saw her approach, armor glinting, spear in hand, but she did not strike. She moved like a predator examining prey that might not even exist. He realized she was trying to gauge his reaction, measuring his instincts. Elias took a deep breath. He decided he would not hide, nor would he confront them directly yet. Instead, he relied on the traps and diversions he had prepared. A panel he had left slightly loose gave way under the wind, sending a controlled spark of electricity near the Huntress's feet. She jumped back instinctively, and Elias noted the hesitation in her movements. Cleverness could create openings even when strength was overwhelming. The Huntresses regrouped, their communication subtle, almost silent. He could see Naira signaling with small hand movements, and the other two adjusted their positions accordingly. Elias smiled faintly. They were skilled, yes, but their movements were predictable once patterns emerged. Human adaptability had been the reason species across the galaxy underestimated humans for centuries. As the storm intensified, Elias realized the outpost itself could become a weapon. The external generator had a weak point, a vent that could direct energy outward if activated carefully. He began preparing it, calculating timing and angle. It would not harm the Huntresses but could create a distraction strong enough to test their reactions. Hours passed. The storm never relented, but Elias worked tirelessly, observing the Huntresses' movements while maintaining the outpost's stability. At one point, he caught Naira watching him through the reinforced window, her eyes sharp, calculating, almost curious. Elias felt a strange mix of fear and respect. She was not just a hunter. She was intelligent, adaptive, capable of understanding strategy. But humans had something the Huntresses had not yet faced fully: intuition under extreme pressure. When a sudden lightning strike hit the nearby mountain ridge, causing a massive rock slide, Elias knew the moment had come. He activated the vent system, sending a controlled burst of energy into the approaching dust storm. The gust knocked debris into their path, forcing the Huntresses to adjust instantly. They moved with skill, avoiding danger, but Elias could see subtle hesitations in their approach. The outpost, a lone human construction, had turned the environment into an ally. Naira approached the control room, her movements careful, deliberate. Elias felt the weight of her gaze as she studied the patterns of his work, the clever use of environment and timing. He realized then that the phrase, "he's mine," was more than a possessive claim. It was recognition of capability. The Huntress acknowledged that the human before her was no ordinary prey. "Impressive," she said finally, voice carrying over the wind. Elias had no idea how she projected it so clearly, yet it was unmistakable. Clever, resourceful, and alive. Elias did not reply immediately. Words could be dangerous. Instead, he continued his work, maintaining the outpost systems, making adjustments, using the storm's chaos to his advantage. The other two Huntresses watched, waiting, testing, but they did not attack. Elias understood. They were curious. They wanted to see if he would survive, if humans could adapt in ways their physical superiority could not anticipate. Night fell, or what passed for night on Vera 9. The storm continued, but now Elias had a rhythm. Every movement of the Huntresses was calculated and observed. He began thinking several steps ahead, predicting their reactions. Humans excelled under pressure because they could improvise. He was not just defending the outpost. He was creating a learning loop, adjusting traps and defenses based on the Huntresses' responses. At one point, a small structural failure occurred in the outer platform. A piece of metal groaned and began to detach. Without hesitation, Elias activated a magnetic clamp and pulled it back into place just as one of the Huntresses stepped near. Naira froze, eyes widening in recognition. This was no ordinary human. He could anticipate, react, and manipulate the environment faster than they could. Hours turned into a full cycle of the storm. Elias had not seen the Huntresses retreat or attack aggressively. Instead, they observed, adapted, and tested. He realized this was a silent challenge, an unspoken battle of skill and intelligence. Humans had survived countless dangers across countless worlds because they could think, adapt, and innovate when brute strength failed. And Elias was proving that principle, one careful move at a time. The storm began to wane slightly, though the wind still tore through the mountains, carrying dust and debris. Elias took a moment to breathe to assess. The Huntresses had not left. Naira remained close to the main observation window, silent, watching him work. Elias realized that the recognition of capability was mutual. They respected each other's skills, even if they did not speak it aloud. Suddenly, a sharp noise, a low rumble from beneath the outpost, caught Elias' attention. He froze, scanning the sensors. Something was moving underground, something massive. The Huntresses noticed it too. For the first time, the three of them paused, moving in unison, weapons ready. Elias understood immediately. The storm had brought more than just wind and lightning. The planet itself was alive in dangerous ways, and survival required cooperation, or at least careful navigation. Elias decided to act. Using the sensors, he guided the Huntresses subtly, sending signals through lights and sounds that drew them toward safer areas while the rumble intensified. He coordinated movements without words, relying on instinct and observation. The Huntresses followed, adapting to his directions in a dance of mutual understanding. For a moment, predator and prey were aligned against a greater threat, the planet's violent energy. The underground tremor ceased as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the outpost shaken but intact. The storm was still raging, but the Huntresses had experienced something unexpected. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but also resourceful, capable of turning danger into opportunity. Naira stepped forward, closer than before, studying Elias with an intensity that made him both uneasy and proud. "You're different," she said finally, voice cutting through the storm. "You survive when others would not, you think when others flee." Elias did not respond. Words were less important than actions. He continued adjusting systems, maintaining the outpost's stability, yet he felt a sense of accomplishment. The Huntresses had seen the truth of humans in extreme conditions. Humans could survive where others failed, using wit, courage, and adaptability. Hours later, the storm began to diminish. Lightning grew less frequent, and the wind softened slightly, though it still carried a threat. Elias monitored every movement outside. The Huntresses gathered near their ships, but Naira lingered, looking at him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. He understood her gaze. It was not just about survival, it was acknowledgement. Humans were capable of extraordinary things when pushed to their limits. For the first time since the storm began, Elias allowed himself a small smile. He had survived the initial encounter, navigated the Huntresses' tests, and demonstrated that human ingenuity and resilience were formidable forces. The outpost, battered but standing, was proof of that. Naira stepped back toward her ship, turning briefly. "We will watch you," she said, voice steady. "Not because we hunt, but because you are remarkable." Elias watched as the Huntresses lifted off, their ships cutting through the remaining storm, disappearing into the violet sky. He felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. They had not attacked, but they had left a message. Humans were not prey. Humans were something more. The storm subsided further, leaving a quiet tension in its wake. Elias walked through the outpost, checking systems and securing the environment. He knew the storm had tested him physically and mentally, but it had also tested the Huntresses. Mutual recognition had been established. Humans had a reputation for unpredictability, for adapting under pressure, and now, one Huntress at least had witnessed it firsthand. Elias paused at the main observation window, looking out at the calm after the storm. The landscape was still dangerous, but for the first time he felt a sense of accomplishment beyond mere survival. Humans had endured as they always had, and they would continue to endure no matter the threat. He settled into the control room, monitoring the sensors for the remaining signs of the storm. The Huntresses were gone for now, but Elias knew they would return, perhaps not as enemies, but as observers, testing, learning, and witnessing the resilience of a human being standing alone on a violent world. And in that quiet moment, amidst the wreckage of the storm, Elias Ward understood something fundamental. Humans were survivors. They were clever, resourceful, and unyielding. No storm, no hunter, no planet could take that away. And that knowledge burned brighter than any lightning across the violet sky. The storm had passed, leaving Vera 9 in a fragile calm. The wind still whispered through the jagged mountains, carrying dust and the faint scent of ozone from countless lightning strikes. Elias Ward moved through his outpost, repairing minor damage, checking structural integrity, and ensuring the sensors and power systems were stable. His hands were steady, though fatigue tugged at his shoulders. Survival had demanded all his energy, but the battle was far from over. The Huntresses had not left entirely. They had retreated only to regroup, and he knew they were observing him. From his control room, Elias scanned the horizon. The storm had cleared the dust enough to see the alien ships, sleek and dark, parked at a distance. Nyra stood beside them, her silhouette sharp against the muted sky. The other two Huntresses moved quietly, weapons ready, as though the storm had not diminished their alertness. Elias noted every detail. Humans had long survived by reading signals, understanding intentions, and predicting outcomes. Observation was as much a weapon as any blade or gun. Hours passed. The Huntresses had not approached. Elias decided it was time to understand them better, to shift from mere survival to establishing communication. He activated a low-frequency signal through the Outpost's communication array, designed not to alarm but to be noticeable. The signal pulsed across a narrow spectrum, simple and repetitive. He hoped it would indicate that he recognized their presence and perhaps their intelligence. Nyra reacted first. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing, scanning the source of the signal. Slowly, she approached the outpost, carefully navigating debris left from the storm. Elias stayed in the control room, hands visible, showing no weapons. Humans survived through strategy, yes, but diplomacy and clever signals often prevented unnecessary conflict. When she reached the outer door, she stopped. Elias could see her armored figure tense, ready for any sudden move. He activated a simple display on the main window, a series of symbols representing basic survival, energy, and direction. The goal was clear, to show that he was capable, intelligent, and not a threat. Humans were clever enough to survive hostile environments, but they could also communicate and negotiate when needed. Nyra's posture relaxed slightly. She spoke, her voice filtered through a translator device he had activated earlier, smooth and precise. "You survive because you adapt quickly. You are clever, human, but why do you not flee?" Elias considered his response carefully. Fleeing would not ensure survival. Observation, preparation, and action do. Humans do not give up easily. We use our minds when strength alone is not enough. Her eyes widened slightly. It was not the answer she expected, but perhaps the answer she respected. Nyra's hand moved subtly, signaling the other Huntresses to hold back. They watched from a distance, still wary but no longer aggressive. Elias realized that humans had a reputation for unpredictability, and he was proving it in ways that impressed even seasoned hunters. For the next several hours, Elias and Nyra engaged in a careful exchange of movements and signals. He showed her the outpost's defense systems, the way he had adapted traps and environmental tools during the storm. She observed without interference, studying how a single human could manipulate systems and terrain that would normally require a team. The other Huntresses watched as well, noting Elias' speed, precision, and calm under pressure. Elias understood that this was not just a test of skill. It was a test of trust, perception, and intelligence. Humans had survived in harsher conditions than Vera 9, not because of brute force, but because of ingenuity, courage, and foresight. Nyra and her companions had yet to see the full extent, but the recognition was forming. At one point, a new threat emerged. A sudden tremor shook the ground beneath the outpost. Elias detected movement deep underground, creatures adapted to the planet, massive and dangerous, stirred by the storm's passage. The Huntresses tensed instantly. For the first time, human and alien instincts aligned against a common danger. Elias knew the creatures could destroy both his outpost and the alien ships if left unchecked. He acted without hesitation. Using the outpost's sensors and automated systems, he signaled safe paths and created distractions to guide the Huntresses away from danger. Nyra followed, adjusting her movements based on his subtle cues. The other two Huntresses mirrored her actions, their confidence growing as they realized Elias' strategies were effective. The creatures passed, leaving the ground trembling but intact. Elias took a moment to catch his breath, and Nyra stepped closer, studying him carefully. "You think faster than we anticipated. You do not merely react, you plan, predict, and adapt." Elias nodded, aware that respect had been earned but not guaranteed. Survival demands it. Humans have endured because we refuse to be predictable, and we refuse to surrender. Observation, adaptation, and intelligence are as powerful as strength. Nyra considered his words. For a moment, the storm, the dust, and the alien presence faded into the background. The recognition was mutual. She signaled to the other huntresses, and they lowered their weapons slightly. Elias realized that human ingenuity, even in isolation, could command respect across species. The rest of the day passed in cautious cooperation. Elias guided the huntresses through minor obstacles, demonstrating environmental manipulation and problem-solving. They followed, learning, adjusting, and slowly treating him not as prey, but as an equal in capability. He set small tasks, reconfiguring the outpost's shields, adjusting energy flows to compensate for storm damage, and the huntresses participated. It was a silent alliance, forged through observation and skill rather than words. By nightfall, the sky cleared, leaving the violet mountains bathed in soft starlight. Elias and Naira stood at the observation window, both aware of the unspoken bond forming. Humans survived by understanding others, predicting behavior and adapting. Naira, for the first time, saw the human capacity to endure and overcome not through strength, but through intelligence, foresight, and courage. "We underestimated you," Naira admitted, her voice low but steady. "We thought humans were simple prey, but you are remarkable." Elias allowed a small smile. "Humans have survived harsh worlds for centuries. We are not the strongest, but we endure because we think, adapt, and act when others falter." Naira's gaze lingered on him. "You are not like the others we have hunted. You think, you adapt, and you survive." It was more than respect, it was recognition. Humans had always been underestimated, and Elias was proving why that was a mistake. He was not just surviving, he was demonstrating the essence of human resilience, intelligence, and ingenuity. In the following hours, a subtle understanding formed. The huntresses no longer acted as predators. They shadowed his movements, followed instructions, and even assisted when necessary. Elias realized that humans and aliens could coexist, at least temporarily, when intelligence and respect were mutually acknowledged. During a lull in activity, Elias showed them the outpost's automated defenses. He guided them through the controls, explaining, through gestures and basic symbols, how the systems worked. Naira watched intently, fascinated by the human capacity to combine machinery, environment, and strategy into a cohesive defense. She had seen skill and strength, but not ingenuity displayed so calmly and effectively under pressure. Night deepened, and Elias prepared a small meal for himself, offering a portion outside for the huntresses in a gesture of trust. Naira accepted it cautiously, taking the food and observing him closely. The act was simple, but it spoke volumes. Humans survived not just through skill, but through understanding, negotiation, and sometimes small acts of connection. The other two huntresses followed, each taking a portion, their suspicion easing slightly. Elias watched them, noting subtle body language, tension that slowly relaxed. He realized that the storm, the threat of predators, and his own ingenuity had created a rare opportunity. The huntresses were learning something they had not expected. Humans were not merely survivors. They were leaders, planners, and problem-solvers, capable of earning cooperation through skill rather than force. By morning, the storm had fully passed. The mountains glimmered under the faint light, and the dust settled into patterns left by wind and debris. Elias walked through the outpost, inspecting damage and making final adjustments. The huntresses were outside, tending to their ships, but their movements were measured, respectful, and increasingly cooperative. Naira approached again, her gaze focused. "You have proven something rare," she said. "Not many could survive what you did. Not many could turn a storm, the environment, and skilled hunters into an advantage. Humans are remarkable." Elias nodded, understanding the depth of her words. Respect had been earned, and it was mutual. He had survived, yes, but he had also demonstrated why humans were respected across the galaxy. Ingenuity, courage, and adaptability could overcome far stronger, faster, and more dangerous beings. The day continued with careful work, each participant learning from the other. Elias repaired sections of the outpost while the huntresses observed and assisted when appropriate. The alliance, however temporary, was built on skill, understanding, and mutual recognition. As night approached, Elias stood at the observation window, looking out at the calm mountains and the alien ships in the distance. The storm was gone, but the lesson remained. Humans survived because they adapted, because they observed, and because they acted with intelligence. The huntresses had seen it firsthand, and Elias knew that their respect was no small thing. Naira stepped beside him silently. For a moment, no words were needed. The acknowledgement of human skill, resilience, and adaptability was enough. Ilias had turned a potential threat into recognition and cautious cooperation. Humans had survived again, proving once more that even in isolation, they could face danger, understand it, and rise above it. As the stars glittered overhead, Ilias felt the quiet pride of survival and the deeper satisfaction of recognition. Humans were underestimated far too often, but when faced with true challenge, they proved why they endured. Naira and her companions had seen it, and now they knew that humans were forces not to be dismissed lightly. The outpost was safe for now, the storm behind them, but the universe remained vast and dangerous. Ilias smiled faintly, knowing that humans, even alone on a distant frontier world, could face the unknown with courage, intelligence, and unyielding resolve. The storm had tested him. The Huntresses had tested him. And he had proven in every way that mattered that humans were survivors, and often something more. The morning sun broke through the violet haze left by the storm, casting long shadows over Vera 9 jagged mountains. Ilias Ward moved through the outpost, checking systems one last time. The walls had held, the sensors were stable, and the generators hummed steadily. The storm was gone, but the universe had a way of testing humans in unexpected ways, and Ilias knew this was far from over. Outside, the Huntresses' ships rested silently. Naira stood near the largest vessel, observing Ilias with the same intense focus she had maintained since the storm began. The other two moved methodically, scanning the terrain, but they no longer displayed the tension of predators. Their posture had shifted. They were no longer hunting. They were studying, assessing, and learning. Ilias stepped onto the observation platform, the wind gentle compared to the previous storms. He met Naira's gaze. "The planet is calm for now," he said. "But calm doesn't last long on Vera 9. It's not the storm that kills, it's the assumption that it will pass." Naira's eyes softened slightly, a rare display of emotion for a huntress. "You think ahead, you plan, you anticipate. Not many do that, not even among your own species." Ilias nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Humans survived because they observed, adapted, and acted intelligently. Strength and speed were useful, but foresight, patience, and creativity often mattered more. Today, he had proven that to beings far stronger and faster than himself. Suddenly, the sensors picked up movement, something large approaching from the northern cliffs. Ilias quickly analyzed the data. The creatures from beneath the mountains had not left. The storm had disturbed them, and now they were moving toward the outpost. Naira noticed the alert on his console and exchanged a glance with Ilias. For the first time, cooperation was necessary not for survival alone, but for mutual protection. Ilias moved quickly, directing the Huntresses through gestures and simple symbols. He showed them weak points in the terrain, safe positions for cover, and lines of retreat if needed. Naira followed precisely, her companions mirroring her. Humans excelled under pressure because they could see solutions where others saw only danger. Ilias' mind worked quickly, combining environmental knowledge, technological tools, and tactical foresight to create a defensive plan. The creatures emerged from the cliffs, massive, armored beasts, adapted to the planet's extreme conditions. They moved with surprising speed, their movements calculated but not intelligent in the human sense. Ilias observed patterns in their motion, noting how they reacted to obstacles and environmental hazards. He relayed these observations to Naira and the others, guiding them to positions where the creatures could be diverted or slowed. Using the outpost systems, Ilias activated energy pulses along strategic points, creating barriers and hazards that forced the creatures to alter their path. He directed Naira to coordinate her team to use their mobility and weapons to channel the creatures away from critical structures. Together, human and Huntresses formed an unexpected alliance, moving as one cohesive unit against the threat. As the creatures advanced, Ilias realized that pure defense would not be enough. Humans thrived when they could turn challenges into opportunities. He led the Huntresses in a calculated counter-movement, luring the creatures toward a natural canyon where their mass and momentum would work against them. Naira followed instinctively, coordinating attacks and ensuring her companions remained in sync with Ilias' strategy. The first creature stumbled into the canyon's narrow entrance. Its massive frame blocked the way for the others behind it, creating a bottleneck. Elias had predicted this outcome, using the terrain to amplify the advantage. He and Naira directed energy pulses and controlled debris to funnel the remaining creatures into the same trap. The Huntresses moved with precision, striking only when necessary, their actions guided by Elias' careful planning. It was a dance of strategy and skill, one that highlighted the human ability to adapt, observe, and act decisively under pressure. The creatures, though formidable, were outmatched by intelligence and coordination. Hours passed in a tense but controlled engagement. The creatures were gradually driven from the outpost, channeled into areas where they could not return. Elias and Naira coordinated movements without words, relying on subtle cues and shared understanding. Humans and Huntresses alike were tested, but the results were clear. Intelligence and adaptability could overcome brute force. Finally, the last creature was diverted into a canyon pool, trapped and unable to move. Elias exhaled, feeling the tension drain from his body. The Huntresses, breathing heavily, lowered their weapons, acknowledging the victory. It had been a true test of skill, foresight, and cooperation. Humans were not prey, they were problem solvers, leaders, and survivors. Naira approached Elias once more, her armor scratched and dust streaked from the engagement. "You are remarkable," she said, voice steady despite exertion. "Your mind, your strategies, they saved us all. Humans are not like other species we have hunted. You survive because you think, because you adapt. That is rare." Elias allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Humans survive because we refuse to surrender. We study, we adapt, and we act decisively. We survive not because we are the strongest, but because we are resourceful and resilient." For a moment, silence fell over the outpost. The wind had died down, and the planet seemed to breathe after the storm and the creatures' assault. Naira and her companions studied him, understanding that the human before them was more than a lone survivor. He represented the ingenuity, courage, and perseverance that made humans respected, even feared, in the galaxy. Naira nodded slowly. "You have proven something rare. Not just skill, but leadership. Humans can survive anything, and you have shown that alone." Elias felt a sense of pride, not arrogance, but quiet satisfaction. Recognition from beings like Naira was not earned lightly. He had survived storms, alien huntresses, and planetary predators. He had relied on intelligence, foresight, and adaptability rather than brute force. Humans had endured, and he had proved why. The Huntresses prepared to depart, their ships rising from the terrain with ease and precision. Naira lingered for a moment, looking at Elias with respect. "We will return," she said. "Not as hunters, but as observers. You are extraordinary." Elias nodded. "I will be here. And I will continue to survive. That is what humans do." The ships disappeared into the horizon, leaving Elias alone once more, but he did not feel the same solitude as before. The storm had tested him, the Huntresses had challenged him, and he had emerged victorious through skill, intelligence, and resilience. Humans survived because they adapted, because they observed, and because they refused to give up. As the sun set over the Violet Mountains, Elias walked through the outpost, checking systems and securing equipment. He reflected on the events of the past days. The storm had brought danger, the Huntresses had tested him, and the creatures had threatened everything he had built. Yet through every challenge, human ingenuity had prevailed. He understood something fundamental. Survival was more than strength or speed. It was observation, it was planning, it was courage under pressure. And it was recognition, understanding that others, even those stronger or faster, could acknowledge skill, adaptability, and intelligence. Humans had always been underestimated, but they survived because they were clever, courageous, and unyielding. Night fell, and Elias stood on the observation platform, looking out at the calm terrain and the dark silhouettes of mountains in the distance. He thought of Naira and her companions, knowing they had seen humans in a new light. Respect had been earned, trust had been tested, and intelligence had prevailed. Humans were more than survivors. They were leaders, innovators, and forces capable of shaping their destiny even in the most hostile environments. The outpost was safe. The storm was gone. The Huntresses had departed, but the knowledge remained. Humans could survive anything, and often they could thrive when others could not. Elias Ward, alone on the edge of a violent frontier world, understood that clearly. Humans were not ordinary, they were extraordinary. As he prepared for the coming days, reinforcing systems and reviewing the outpost's defenses, Elias knew one thing. Humans endured, and they would continue to endure. Vera 9 had tested him, the Huntresses had challenged him, and he had emerged victorious. The universe was vast, dangerous, and unpredictable, but humans were clever, resilient, and unyielding. And that was a truth that even the most formidable beings could not ignore. Elias settled into the control room, watching the stars shimmer over the mountains. The storm, the Huntresses, and the creatures were behind him, but the lessons remained. Survival was not about strength alone. It was about observation, intelligence, courage, and the refusal to surrender. Humans embodied all of these qualities. And in the vast expanse of the galaxy, that was more than enough to thrive. He took a deep breath, letting the calm settle around him. The frontier was dangerous, yes, but humans had survived worse. The storm had tested him. The Huntresses had challenged him. And through it all, he had demonstrated the true essence of humanity: cleverness, adaptability, and unbreakable will. Tomorrow, the Outpost would face new challenges. Perhaps new storms, perhaps new predators, perhaps new visitors from distant worlds. But Elias was ready. Humans always were. They survived, they adapted, they endured, and above all, they thrived. The night deepened, stars shining brightly over the mountains, and for the first time in days, Elias felt a quiet certainty. The universe was vast, wild, and unpredictable, but humans were extraordinary, and he was living proof.